Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome to a brand new series, a series which I'm going to call Inflation Reports. And it's not just a brand new series, this is a brand new channel that I've created. And so I hope to reach a particular audience. And I know there's many people at the moment that are, like myself, you're interested in the world of economics and the world of finance. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about inflation and will there be inflation? Will government QE schemes and government stimulus programs result in huge amounts of inflation? Lots of people are saying, oh, Zimbabwe this and Weimar Germany that. We hear this a lot in sort of podcasts and things. And I thought, what would be a great project would be to actually examine on a real-time basis what inflation actually is, or what the rate of inflation is. And now, of course, we have the CPI, which the government prepares. But again, people are quite skeptical of that number. Is CPI a true reflection of the rate of inflation? And I thought, well, hey, look, I don't have to rely on the government to calculate inflation for me. I will go and I'll get the data and we will figure it out for ourselves. So this is going to be really exciting. We're going to look at the last 12 months since the COVID crisis happened in March 2020. We're going to come up with our own inflation calculation, which I will let you into, and I'm going to update that once a month. So you'll be able to see it in real time monthly. And here's the really exciting bit, guys. The really exciting bit is I'm going to calculate inflation, but I'm going to calculate three different values for inflation. I'm going to call them inflation report price index 1, inflation report price index 2, and inflation report price index 3. And you might think, oh, that's a bit crazy. Why are you calculating three figures for inflation? But let me explain. I in my studies around what inflation is, I've come to the conclusion that really inflation is different for different people, because some goods and services increase in value at different rates to other goods and services, and depending on what you're going to spend your income on, that dictates to you what rate of inflation is most applicable to your life. So we're going to examine in detail different types of inflation for different types of people, and it's quite a new concept. I'm sure somebody's thought about this before, but yeah, we're gonna measure three separate types of inflation, and we're gonna track it, and we're gonna answer that big question, that big elephant in the room: is inflation happening before our eyes? And then let's just see how it goes. But I think I'll get cracking with a few slides, and then we'll get into the calculations. Okay, guys, slide 1. Then I'm going to whiz through these slides because I know that most people watching this, I hope, have got some kind of at least basic understanding of these concepts. So we'll be swift. What is inflation? Inflation is the increase in the price of goods over time. Now, the way I like to think about this, and the classic example, especially for people from the UK, we always say, oh, do you remember the days when Freddos were 10p? This was, if you grew up in the UK in the sort of 90s, you would definitely remember the Freddo being a staple of the tuck shop, the school tuck shop. So the price of a Freddo remained at 10 pence until 2005, and since then the price has increased roughly 2 pence per year, peaking in 2017. And we always go on, we say, oh, the days Freddos were 10 pence a bar, those were the days. And so we see inflation before our eyes, and often we talk about house prices in the UK, and we say, oh, I remember when my parents, they bought the family home in the 90s, and it was 60,000 for a 3-bed semi, and of course now that same home would be £250,000, and you think, oh, why is that? Why is that? And of course it's inflation. Goods and services increase over time. So let's swiftly move on then. So some view inflation as the change in ratio between the money supply and total goods available. So some would argue very adamantly that, look, if we increase the money supply, then there's going to be more dollars, more pounds, more euros chasing a similar amount of goods or services, or perhaps in the case of the COVID epidemic, less goods and services maybe. Therefore, money over goods, well, if you increase the numerator, then the fraction will grow. So the price will increase. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. I hear this rhetoric that the money printing will lead to inflation, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. The US government has started doing direct stimulus. They are giving money to their citizens. Normally programs such as quantitative easing and QE, these sort of subtle backdoor ways of printing money, normally only result in financial markets being pumped. But now we see stimulus and talk of UBI, universal basic income, all these extra benefits and freebies that just essentially come out of thin air. If it's not backed by tax revenues, then the money's got to come from somewhere. So this is really important to the rhetoric, this idea that the money supply is expanding, and this is making us curious. We're thinking, okay, what will inflation do now that we're trying these new techniques? So let's move on then. Some consider inflation to be a method of stealth taxation due to the government increasing the money supply. Now we know what happens when inflation occurs. Who loses? Well, the people lose. And as I was just saying, remember, not so long back, in a couple of slides back, we were talking about the Freddos. And look, I think we can live. If Freddos were 10 pence and now they're 30, we can live with that. We're not going to get too caught up about it. But houses, I'm a relatively younger person myself, and my peers, they want to get on the housing ladder. And we say, well, houses 30 years ago were a quarter of the price to what they are now. And now the banks talk of, forget a 15-year mortgage in the UK, the bank will say, well, you must have a 40-year mortgage or something crazy like that. And I think 40 years, I don't know if I'll even be alive in 40 years. You can't guarantee that. So that's really interesting. And inflation does affect us. Often it's very subtle because it's so slow and gentle. It's like boiling a frog, isn't it? The prices go up a couple of % a year and you don't notice it. But when we look back over a long period of time, we see the effects are really real. Let's keep moving then. So now, skipping one ahead. What is inflation? Okay. Inflation is typically measured using the Consumer Price Index. Now, this is the government statistic. So immediately when the government is telling us something, we want to trust them. We want to trust them. We should trust the authorities, but we always want to be a bit skeptical. We're a bit skeptical when they say things, and so that's the purpose of this channel. We're going to figure it out for ourselves. What's the true rate of inflation? Can we trust the government figures? Do they resemble the truth? So, excuse me, I'm just going to have a sip of coffee. Okay. So, the CPI does account for food and drink, rents, energy, recreation, leisure, dining, and hotels. Okay, fair enough. You might read that and say, oh, well, that's it. We're going to get the true rate of inflation from the CPI. It's going to be great. Well, it does not account for actual home prices. That's a big factor. The cost of savings and investments. I wonder if maybe you're watching this video and you're thinking about your savings and your investments because you have some kind of ambitions. Maybe you want to set up a business, so you're saving towards setting that up. Perhaps you have ambitions to retire, maybe retire earlier than the statutory age, and you're concerned therefore for investing and for saving and for providing for yourself and your family when that time comes. That's a cost you have to bear. Here we go then. The UK CPI applies a weight of 14% to housing. So why do I bring this up? Well, I think that 14% these days is far too low. When I speak to my peers, when I look at speak to friends and family, to say, well, only 14% of our monthly expenditure relates to our homes is, I don't think, correct. Because let's say the average mortgage in the UK is now £1,000. You're essentially saying that the average income, therefore, must be about £7,500, which would suggest that everyone in the UK is earning about £100,000 a year. And that's just completely false. The average wage in the UK is probably not even a third of £100,000 a year. So I think that this 14% in a weight, the 14% weight in the CPI index for housing, I think it's far too low. And, they're not looking at or not thinking about it. And of course, the government is self-interested. They want to keep CPI low. They don't want you to believe there is inflation, because then you will move out of the currency. You'll move out of pounds. You'll move out of dollars. You'll move out of euros, because you'll be like, why would I hold them, right? If they're going to the purchasing power is going to decline. So I've said here, in this video, I will attempt to demonstrate that inflation is not a fixed figure, such as CPI, but it is instead a variable indicator that changes person to person. And the point of this, guys, is that inflation depends on what you want to buy. And what you want to buy is not necessarily what somebody else wants to buy. And so I've as I talked about at the beginning of this video, I've developed three indicators, three indexes, which I will explain in more detail. But let's keep going. So inflation, what is it at the moment? So inflation per the Office for National Statistics. So the latest statistics I could get was for the year ended February 2021. My inflation calculations are for the year ended March 21, but I think that's close enough for us to do a comparison. So CPIH, according to the government, is 0.7. CPI, according to the government, is 0.4. Now CPIH is essentially the same as CPI, except for it says here that it's got the addition of owner-occupied housing measured according to the rental equivalence theory. Now, I don't really know what that is, but all you need to know is that the government thinks that inflation is roughly between 0.4 and 0.7. They also calculate something called the RPI. Now, the RPI, for some reason, they calculated it within their workings. So the Office for National Statistics, if you go on their website, they have these big spreadsheets that you can download. And they calculate CPIH, they calculate CPI, and then they calculate RPI, and then they say, oh, but we don't think RPI is relevant. So they calculate this figure and then they don't use it. But RPI is always higher, and I think it's probably more fair, but they don't like it. So the RPI is 1.4. We don't need to know the details and the nuances and the statistical methods behind these, really. All we need to know is that the government says that inflation is somewhere between 0.4 and 1.4. You might as well call it 1%, right? So I'm going to weigh that. I'm going to weigh that claim. I'm going to look at data myself, and I'm going to calculate what I believe the rate of inflation was for the last year or so. And we're going to track it each month. We're going to look at April, we'll look at May, etc., etc., etc. And we're going to really scrutinize what the inflation rate is at the moment. So moving on then. So IRPI. Now, guys, my channel, this video series, it's called Inflation Report. So the IRPI simply stands for the Inflation Report Price Index. That's it. I've made my own price index. Why not? Come on. And I think I hope that I will be able to trust it with more certainty, because it's not, I haven't got any self-interest really. I'm not trying to keep it artificially low. I'm just, taking the data I have and showing you as it is. So for the year to the 31st of March 2021, I'm calculated what I believe is the inflation rate. Now, remember I said I've got 3 tiers of inflation for 3 different types of people. And I'm going to walk you through that now, because this is really important to figure out how this applies to you and your life. And ultimately, this is what this is all about, helping people figure out what's going on and how inflation is affecting their lives and your life. So here I've said, in the following slides, I will present what I believe are the true inflation rates for 3 categories of individual. So the first one I've called IRPI1, Inflation Report Price Index 1. So this is inflation for an individual who saves 0% of their monthly income. This person lives paycheck to paycheck. If they save any money at all, it is all in cash. Their expenditure comprises mostly rents and consumer goods. Now, this was probably all of us at one point in our lives. We lived a constant cycle of paycheck to paycheck. We never had any savings. And that was just the reality of it. And let me share with you today that this is the reality for many people working and living in the UK. Many people on the minimum wage, this is their reality. Every penny they have has to be spent on living. So that's IRPI1. Let's move on to IRPR2 then. So inflation for the middle income individual. This person is able to save and invest 50% of their income. Their expenditure comprises a mixture of consumer goods as well as income generating investments using the 60-40 portfolio. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to envisage somebody who is perhaps saving for retirement. They're a middle income. They've got a good few years under their belt career-wise, and they earn quite well. This person can save and invest half of their income, which is quite a lot. So the way I've tried to calculate this is we need to account for the fact that they need to save for something, say their retirement. And the reason I've used the 60-40 portfolio in these calculations is because that is broadly what is recommended by advisors. I'm speaking very generally here. I'm not suggesting this is what advisors necessarily do or have recommended, but it is a common cliche, the 60-40. That is the standard way to invest and save for retirement. So the 60-40, think about it. If you're saving for retirement, you might say, right, I want to own a bond that will pay me an income stream of £50,000 per annum. Now, you might have been able to buy that bond for £1 million 10 years ago, but today that bond might cost you £2 or £3 million for the same bond. And so you've got to weigh that up and say, okay, well, this person whose the purpose of owning that bond is to have the income it generates, that bond has got more expensive by 2 or 3-fold. Now that's inflation. That the cost of that bond has risen. And of course, this is assuming they're not going to sell it, and it's very difficult to get the balance. Something important for IRPI2, for those who are more into the details of how I come up with these figures, is with regards to the 60, we've talked about the 40. We've talked about the 40, which would be the bond allocation, but also the 60, the stock allocation. Now, the way I've looked at inflation with stocks is you can't just say a stock has gone up 10% last year, therefore the inflation in price is 10%. Think about it carefully. If the purpose of owning that stock is because you want to benefit from the dividend income stream, so let's say the dividend income stream was £100 a year off a given stock. If you purchase that stock for £1,000 and then the price of the stock goes up to £1,200, so it's appreciated 20%, but the dividend income stream has remained the same, then that stock has got more expensive if the purpose of owning the stock is because you want the dividend stream. So what that means is I've accounted for, in IRPI2, I've accounted for dividend growth. So where stocks have appreciated, I have capped that appreciation and brought it back down by accounting for some growth in dividend. Because we're thinking about value and yield. And in a stock where the dividend yield is unchanged, technically its value, arguably its value could still be the same because the yield is still the same, you see. So we can't just look plainly at growth in investment value for IRPI2. And the point I've made here at the very last sentence, I've said that the purpose of their investing is to generate an income stream to allow for retirement. Now, this is different to IRPI 3, which we will get onto next. And I hope some of you will appreciate this nuance. So IRPI 3, then finally, this is inflation for the high net worth individual or family office. For this class of person, living costs are negligible. So look, they're not worried about the price of milk. They're not worried about the price of bread. They're not even worried about the price of housing or cars, because it's just nothing. It's nothing relative to their income. The purpose of their investing is firstly to preserve purchasing power. So if you're a very wealthy individual and you're managing that wealth, one of the things on your mind or on the mind of your money manager is, how do I preserve what has been created? Perhaps somebody's had a brilliant business. They've really contributed to society. They've developed something really amazing and they've become very wealthy off it. Now, how do you preserve what the empire, if you like, you have built? That is a key thing for these people. And notice the difference. This is not saving for retirement, but this is preserving purchasing power. And further, they want to generate growth. Now, look, this is really important, this next sentence. So this is measured by their ability to own the best businesses. Control is important. And to purchase the most desirable assets, e.g. the best real estate. Now think about this. Remember we were talking about dividend growth for the IRPI 2 individual. This person, they want to live off the dividend. The capital growth is great, but the income stream is what's important. Now the difference between the IRPI 2 person and the IRPI 3 person is the IRPI 3 person, not only do they want to have a stake in the best businesses, but perhaps they actually want to vote in the best businesses. They want to have maybe control in the best businesses. Now, when you own a share, believe it or not, you do actually have some minor voting rights. You can vote for a shareholder during a shareholder resolution. You can cast your vote based on how many shares you have. But think about it. How many shares do you need to control a business? Well, you need 51%. And even to do some types of resolutions, you normally need 10 or 15% stake of a business or something like that. And so think about it. If the purpose of owning a company is because you want to influence the company and you want to have control over some of the ways that business is run, then even if the price goes up, that is still essentially, if the price goes up and the purpose of investing is because you want control or voting rights, the price of that stock has got more expensive because one share always equals one vote, broadly speaking. So, if you wanted to have, let's say, Tesla shares were $500 last year and one share is one vote. Well, then if you want the same amount of votes this year when they're $750, then you're going to have to spend more money. The dividend yield on given company might be the same. You might get the same percentage back in terms of return, in terms of dividend yield. But you've got to pay that premium to have the same number of shares to exercise whatever degree of control you want to exercise. And I think this is relevant because think about it, guys. How many times do you hear of the biggest companies and they say, oh, so-and-so is a shareholder, or so-and-so, or Warren Buffett, or, what's the company? Berkshire Hathaway have the controlling stake in this venture. How many times is that the case? And even private equity and venture capital, this is all about getting involved and also exercising some degree of control, getting your specialists in, having a seat at the table, appointing somebody to the board, doing something more than just holding the stock. And when that is your goal, the point of all this, what I'm trying to say is that if your goal is to have more than just ownership of the stock, but you want to interact with the business and take part in it, then inflation is going to be higher because you're less concerned with the yield from the dividend, you're more concerned in taking part with the company. Of course, I understand these are huge generalizations and huge assumptions, and I'm sure there's many wealthy passive investors too. But I just think that this was a good nuance to make between the middle income person who's saving for retirement and a more high net worth individual who actually maybe wants to exercise more control over a business. So I'm going to have a sip of coffee and then we'll get to the results, which I'm sure you're excited for. Okay then guys, here they are then. So the results for IRPI for the year ended 31st of March 2021, and we are going to look at this for every month, once a month. I'm going to do an update and we're going to track inflation in real time for these people groups, but let's go. So here we go. IRPI1, the spender. My calculated inflation rate using independent data, non-government data, is 4.36%. Now that's a long shot away from the 1% that the CPI was telling us, yeah? And you can see here I've just analysed some of the calculations. So you can see most of the weight goes to housing. So do you remember we said that the CPI apportioned a rate of 14% to housing? I think that's too low. I think in reality, people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're spending somewhere between a third and a half of their income on rent. So I've allocated 33% to housing. Excuse me. And also my calculation for inflation is based on house prices, not on rental costs. Yeah. And that's because I think more people these days are trying to go for a mortgage. They're trying to get that top line. They want to have that equity. They want to feel like they're contributing into something they own. And the rates of inflation of housing in the UK, this is the UK, last year was 7.8%. So that's the main driver of inflation. So you can see some other spending habits I've got down here then. I've allocated quite a bit to leisure and entertainment, quite a bit to travel, fuel, clothing, groceries. Telephone and internet, according to my research, is very high inflation. Maybe that's questionable, but the weight is only 2%, so it's got very little bearing on the outcome. But yes, so if you are watching this video today and you are from the UK and you are somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, I would suggest that your inflation rate for your life is closer to 4.3%, not 1%. So maybe you're thinking about that, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means unless you're getting a pay rise each year of 4.3%, then you're getting poorer every year because your income is becoming 4% less valuable each year, broadly speaking. So that's the result for IRPI1. Let's go and check out IRPI2 then. Here we go. Now this is really interesting. IRPI2 saver investor. Remember, this person spends 50% of their income into investment vehicles, which I've deemed to be 60-40 bonds, stocks. Again, massive generalization, but trying to capture a broad idea of what people roughly are doing. So we can see, look, housing, straight away, the weight of housing for this individual is much, much lower. They only spend a quarter of their income on housing. And think this could be somebody who's making £75,000-80,000 a year. And I'm suggesting their mortgage is possibly a quarter of that. So that's probably, I don't know if that's about right. I think that's roughly about right and where it should be. It's certainly not, it's not a third, but it's a quarter. We have very high taxes in the UK as well, so all these to bear in mind. What I've added in a new category that you don't have in IRPI1. So I've added in schooling. Now, education is free in the UK generally, but I thought, well, the IRPI2 individual, they might be a bit older, married, with children, and perhaps they send their children to a fee-paying school. So I factored in the fact that maybe they spend a small portion of their income on school fees. That's something that is not affordable generally for the IRPI1 individual. They would typically not, they wouldn't typically have private school education, right? Okay, so otherwise the ratios are pretty similar, but here's where things get really different, and this is where it's interesting. Savings and investments, 50% weight. Half of their income is going into bonds and stocks. Now, what's interesting, I'll share with you a bit of the detail behind this, but last year, March to March, the net weight of the 60/40 portfolio rose about 20%. Now, that is humongous, and most of that is driven by the North American S&P index, which recovered magically from COVID, as many of you will know. It just, V shape, and now it's back at all-time highs at the time of recording this video. And so that is the driver of this huge growth. Now, remember we were talking earlier about dividend yield and how that's relevant. I've basically, how I've accounted for that is I've assumed that dividend growth is 5%. Therefore, if a company's cost, if the cost of owning the shares has increased 10% year on year, I've took off 5% to account for the fact that although the price has gone up 10%, the dividend's gone up 5%. So I've said the price, the real price, if you like, has really only gone up about 5%. And that's a very fag packet way of doing this, but I do think it's helpful. And even with that, even accounting for 5% dividend growth, which is a strong dividend growth, bearing in mind, many of these companies don't even pay a dividend, so you've got zero dividend growth. Excuse me. Bear with me. Even still, even combining in the bonds got cheaper March to March, but the S&P did about 60%. The FTSE did very well, about 25%, I think. Don't hold me to that. So the inflation rate for this portfolio in terms of value is 20%. It was 20% more expensive to get hold of these investment vehicles, to get hold of these bonds, to get hold of these stocks, with the view to benefit from the income stream that they give. Not necessarily to benefit from the growth, although that's an inherent consequence of owning the stocks, but because we're setting up a pool of assets that allow us to retire and to have the lifestyle we wish when we're grey and old. So that weighted at 50% has a huge impact on the inflation rate, and it means that for the IRPI2 individual, middle income, invests and saves about half of their income, spends the rest, their inflation rate, I believe, is about 12.3%. Now, this is mind-blowing because it's so high. And if this is true, which I believe it does carry some weight and some truth about it, this has huge implications for markets. And we know, and so many people are commenting and saying how borrowing is all 0%, mortgages are 2%, all this debt floating around at near 0%. It's going to have consequences. And I think these are the consequences we're seeing. This easy money, easy lending, banks easy lending, and it's just driving the prices of financial assets to the moon. Great if you hold them. Not so good if you don't. Finally then, let's move on to the big one, IRPI3, the high net worth individual / family office. Let's take a look. So IRPI3, wow, look at this. Inflation rate, 21%. Wow. So look, all we're looking at here is all of their income just goes back into their portfolio. This person has so much income that if they want to go and spend $5,000 on rents per month, so what? That's the sort of person this is. Now, that's a scary inflation rate, 20%. That's very scary. It's looking more like what Michael Saylor says when he believes that the true inflation rate is equal to the expansion in the money supply. Just go and watch his podcasts if you want to learn more about that. But essentially, this rate here is a little bit higher than the saving rate of the IRPI2 for the reason I discussed, whereby this individual, when they buy the stock, they're maybe not so concerned about the dividend, but they're thinking, how can I make an impact in this company? How can I vote at this company? How can I appoint my friends to the board of this company and influence it in the way I want to? And therefore, for me, the value is in the control and the power. And therefore, I don't care if the dividend yield stays the same. I've still got to buy one vote. I've still got to buy a vote. And if the cost of a vote has gone up, then that is full-bodied inflation for me. So in IRPI 3, I've made no discount for the dividend growth that may be occurring in the underlying securities. Disagree with me if you want, and I'm happy people to reach out. The point of this is I'm going to tailor it, I'm going to refine it, and as the months go on, we're going to really scrutinize and get to the meaning. What is inflation? What's the meaning of it? It's debated at the moment, which is why I've come up with my own term, because I don't want to just say, oh, this is inflation. I want to say, well, no, this is the index that I use to monitor inflation, and this is why I believe that this is the right rate of inflation. So anyway, guys, I'll end the video there. I hope you really liked it. I hope you like the idea of 3 different inflation rates for 3 different types of people. I think that's so relevant and so important. And yeah, feel free to get in the comments below. And I hope you will tune into the next update, which will happen sometime at the end of April. I will, of course, possibly produce ad hoc videos in between. But yeah, this is an exciting project. We're at a unique moment in history. Lots of people say, oh, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Weimar Germany, inflation's going to go mad. Well, if it is going to happen, who knows is the answer. But let's track inflation for ourselves with an unbiased view, and let's see how it all unfolds. Yeah. So, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Goodbye.